Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Digesting the Governor's Budget. My name is Adriana Sanchez-Aldana, and I am the Executive Director of the California Council for Adult Education, CCAE. Today's webinar is a joint effort with the California Adult Education Administrators Association, CCAE. Before we get started, I have a couple of logistical items to share with you. If you are viewing us on your computer, there is a chat area on your screen where you will be able to type in questions that you may have during the presentation. Victoria Abate and I will be monitoring the chat box and will bring those questions to Dawn at the end of her presentation. Also, many of you have asked if the webinar is being recorded. The answer is yes, and a link will be emailed to members in about a week. So, today's presenters are, of course, myself, Victoria Abate, CCAE State Legislative Chair and Director, College and Career and Adult Education at Mount Diablo, Steve Curiel, CCAE State Legislative Chair and Principal of Huntington Beach Adult School, and Dawn Kepke, CCAE and CCAE Legislative and Budget Advocate. I'd also like to recognize David Palmer, CCAE Office Manager, for managing the webinar and logistics for us. So now I'll turn the webinar over to Victoria Abate.
Thank you, Adriana. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're very glad that you're joining us today for this important update that Dawn is going to give us on the recently approved governor's budget for 2021 and its impact to adult education in California. I think you know that our organizations, CCAE and CCAE, which I think you see the logos at the top of your screen or left of your screen. We've been working very closely together the last few years to align our efforts and support the legislative advocacy work that we need to do in California to ensure that the wonderful programs that Adult Ed offers and services to our communities and our school districts is sustained. I'm glad to tell you today that we have someone who you know well, Steve Curiel, who has just recently finished his term as our CCAE president and will now in a new role be accompanying me in many instances working with Dawn to work closely on legislative advocacy in his new role as the Vice President of Legislation for CCAE. So I want to thank CCAE for moving forward with CCAE and CCAE board. I want to thank you for moving forward with CCAE so that we can better represent the organizations in the field and do the work that needs to be done with Dawn. And welcome, Steve, and I think you might want to say a few words.
Yes, thank you, Victoria, and welcome everyone. I'm glad to see, looks like we're up to 52 participants, so that's exciting for us. And as you know, we're going to be talking about the January proposal from the governor. And just in thinking about that, we all eagerly await that proposal. And I know most of you have probably taken a first glance at it. And I'll have to admit, when I saw it, I was my gut reaction was a little bit of a disappointment. And it's not the first time we've been here where we don't necessarily see what we're looking for. But I just wanted to remind everyone, one, that's normal. And then two, that this is a process. This is the first of the official proposals. We've got another one in May, and nothing is set in stone until June, when the legislature and the governor come to agreement and they sign off on the budget. So we have a process in front of us, and that's why we're here today, to begin to plan and come up with our next steps in this process and how we're going to influence and get the legislature and governor to hopefully make some decisions and put some funding, some increased funding towards our adult ed program. And that's why we have Dawn here. She's going to help us with that process, with that planning. Dawn has been the advocate for us for a number of years now for both CCAE and CCAE. And I will say that in Sacramento, she is the face of adult ed there in the Capitol. And they know that she represents us well. So that's good for us if she's known. But if she's the face, I'll have to say that we in the field are the hands and feet. We're the ones that need to get this, need to pull this off. Dawn can only do so much. So I just remind everyone, even though she's our speaker and presenting for us right now, she relies on us to get the work done as far as the local advocacy and really building her voice up in Sacramento. So again, I thank you guys for joining us, and I hope you pay careful attention to this webinar and then some other directions and plans we have coming up for you guys. And with that, I just want to hand it off to Dawn. Thank you, Dawn.
Great. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Good afternoon. Happy to be with you this fine Friday on a holiday weekend. So certainly we have a lot of work ahead of us. All of that said, I think we still have great connections, continuing to hear from folks, key folks that we'll talk about in terms of kind of what they can do to help, what have you. So certainly, although we're not seeing that big infusion of funding we really had hoped to see, there are dynamics that unfortunately continue to make us kind of challenged to get there, but still some great opportunity ahead of us, and I think you'll hopefully agree. So in terms of, just kind of doing a recap, I know many of you have been, kind of working with me and who've been part of the organizations for many, many years. And so you've heard kind of this, before, you've lived kind of the history before now. But we do have a number of new members as part of CCAE and CCAE. And I think it's important to provide some perspective for some of those new members in terms of where we are today and how far we've come. Additionally, I think, in order to kind of chart our best kind of path forward, we really need to make sure we're clear on where we came from, the obstacles we faced, the opportunities and pathways we took to get those addressed so that we can continue to improve upon those strategies, learn from lessons, what have you. So as part of that, certainly well understood that there were massive budget impacts in kind of the, late 2000s, mid to late 2000s in terms of, downturn in the economy that resulted in categorical flexibility, which had massive implications for adult ed as it was constructed then as a standalone program in the K-12 system. Ultimately, that categorical flexibility really decimated a lot of our adult schools statewide, but we have really kind of started to come back from that, and I think in a very positive way. I mean, sure, there's still challenges that lie ahead and that you all face each day. However, I think we have made great strides, and that's in large part a result of, adult ed being a key point of focus for many years thereafter, based on your advocacy and support of our work here in Sacramento. Additionally, we had a number of entities like the Department of Education developing a strategic plan for adult ed, Little Hoover Commission providing a report that unfortunately proposed to shift all of adult ed to the community college system, which was not tenable from our perspective, certainly as largely K-12 providers. But additionally, our community college partners at that time had concerns with that as well. Additionally, the Legislative Analyst Office, who's the nonpartisan policy and budget advisor to the legislature, also kind of highlighted, that it is a bifurcated system, that there was, need for looking at better coordination to review the program areas, but also importantly, the LAO, in their infinite wisdom, really kind of pushed for the importance of dedicated funding for adult ed too, which was very positive. And then finally, as part of governor's budget proposal under kind of the last governor, we actually saw out of the gate with that new administration proposal to shift adult ed again to the community college system. Fortunately, we were able, through your good work, as well as our work here in Sacramento, working with legislators who we're hearing from you in the districts, as well as kind of us here in Sacramento, were able to put that to bed very quickly, which was very positive. And so really, I think what we're looking for as part of that is to kind of continue that work now. And so these are just kind of a snapshot of some of the white papers, position papers that we've put together kind of over the years. As you can see, I mean, each year we really kind of do our best and diligence to, you know, put forward kind of proactive, solutions-oriented feedback and proposals to address the issues that we face, and this year is no exception to that. And so in terms of, you know, making lemonade out of lemons, I mean, again, categorical flexibility, where adult ed just in the K-12 system alone was funded at about $750 million. Obviously, you know, kind of a different scenario now in terms of the adult ed program dollars being combined with our community college partners, and certainly at a much lower threshold than what K-12 alone was funded at that time. But as part of that, I mean, that discussions, we were able to tamp down on the proposal to move adult ed to the community college system in its entirety. And as part of that work, and what came out of that 2013 and 14 kind of budget negotiations is we ultimately got to a place where we started to move forward with what we now have as kind of regional consortia efforts. And so that was really kind of began with AB 86 in terms of that planning process and that planning process ongoing. And then thereafter, continuing to the work on that. And all of this was really guided in a very significant way by the framework that we had been putting together and continuing to revise over those years in terms of recommendations for how adult education should be structured in terms of a coordinated effort and more collaboration with our partners in the community college system and other organizations and communities. And so we really were very directly involved, and much of what you'll see in those frameworks that we developed were indeed what we have as part of our program today. So for better or worse, I know there are, you know, challenging, you know, aspects of it. I think the point here is that we were successful in kind of helping to drive what that looks like. And certainly we're going to continue to work on refinements, but we're at the table, and I think that's the point. And certainly in 2018, obtaining that COLA, changing the term grant from adult ed block grant with concerns over it being limited term funding because of the word grant. Also working on addressing the indirect rate issue, given concerns about school districts perhaps being so varied in terms of what they were charging for indirect rates that was without specificity towards you know, kind of any kind of specific range or cap, especially when the adult ed program dollars are all that we have for the most part in terms of serving our students. So really very positive. 2019 also provided a COLA as well, and some other refinements that continue to be put forth. So again, that priorities framework, we've really kind of talked through that. We did request at that stage, we were pushing for the $110 million for increased funding. Unfortunately, we have, again, continued to struggle to get that solidified. And I think that's in large part given just kind of long-term outlook issues for the budget, as well as just competing priorities, which we'll talk about. Obviously, COLA, indirect rate, grant. We also have been working for many years on kind of fee policies specific for CTE. That's definitely still an area where we need to do more work. So more to come on that. But again, really, I mean, I think all in all, you know, 4 out of 6 requests are certainly, you know, significant. Obviously, the most being, you know, the increased funding, but we're continuing to chip away at that request. And then certainly 2019 funding, again, top of the list. We came out of that with COLA. Unfortunately, our adult ed teacher credentialing proposal work group was vetoed by the governor. We do have more work to do with him on that. We spent a lot of time, invested a lot of effort into working with our labor organization friends at the California Teachers Association and CFT and others. Obviously, we still have work to do. We got to a place where they were generally neutral, if not supporting, but given concerns by the administration about potential duplication with work that's already underway, as well as administration really kind of, again, relying on some recommendations out of the LAO and others that we just remove the teaching credential, which we said was a non-starter for a host of reasons. Most importantly, from the feedback we've received from our teachers, that credential is important to them in terms of kind of their approach to being a teacher, their concerns about professionalism, and that's really important in terms of distinguishing us as K-12-based adult ed program providers and the need to ensure we're aligned with our K-12 system. Nevertheless, I think we still, again, are very well situated, just more work to be done on that particular front with the administration, as well as the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. So more to come in terms of future work on that. So in terms of our priorities this year, again, funding remains at the top of the list. We're continuing to include a consistent approach on that, and in order to kind of additionally continue to build on the credibility that we're not significantly, kind of changing the game year over year in terms of funding. I think, to the extent that we're not successful in working with the legislature to infuse some additional dollars this year, obviously there may come a point as part of next year or even future year budget discussions to adjust that number given kind of the increasing challenges and costs, what have you, that you all are facing at the local level. But for the time being, we still continue to believe, and I apologize, that should say 110 million. Math is not my strong suit. I talk for a living. But nonetheless, 110 million we do believe is still completely warranted and defensible in terms of the need, as well as kind of the pathways and approaches in terms of utilizing those funding and prioritizing what that would go to. As far as this year goes, in addition to that funding request, we are also going to be pushing forward updates to the Ed Code. You may be aware, we've been talking about this for a little bit now, that there is Ed Code in the K-12 sections of the code for adult ed that no longer mirror what the current adult education system in both the K-12 system as well as in our work with our community college partners. They don't match up in every Ed Code reference at this stage. So there is a need to do some cleanup as part of that work. So the CCAE and CCAE team have done a tremendous job in terms of going through those Ed Code sections as identified by the Department of Finance and the Department of Education, really just to kind of look at and refine that language so as to kind of clean up those codes, ensure that that better aligns with what we have before us today, as well as look for opportunities to further refine the program to be clear and consistent in terms of what the intent of the legislature had in kind of setting up this structure, but also to help ensure improvements in terms of delivery, what have you. And so as far as those programmatic refinements, certainly that's really something that we are also really looking very closely at. In terms of funding specifically, I would just note that as part of when we look at kind of the latest reports coming out that consortia have reported to the state in terms of their expenditures, what have you, we do note that between both systems over the course of the last couple of years, there's been an increasing level of carryover from year to year, and that's growing. It's becoming a bit concerning in terms of our asking for additional funding at 110 million. And what's noteworthy is that we estimate that the carryover that is in kind of the current budget year actually adds up to right around 110 million. And so the concern there being is, we are asking for 110 million more on top of what we have in the system today, and yet we can't necessarily in all cases defend the rationale reasons for why 110 million is being carried over and growing from year to year between the two systems. I think we have a better handle on some of the rationale for our K-12 consortium members, so things like infrastructure needs and so on. But the challenge becomes is that on the community college side of things, we don't have as clear of an understanding as to why that funding is being carried over. So we are working with ACE, the Association of Continuing and Community Education, which is largely the non-credit providers in the community college system, working with them to try to obtain better insight and information about why that carryover is occurring, so that we can better position ourselves on how best to address the issue if there is an issue that needs to be addressed. So that could entail perhaps providing kind of some more clear criteria about what constitutes an acceptable carryover amount, whether that, and not that we have settled specifically on anything in particular. I want to be clear about that. But to the extent that some adult schools or even community college partners may be sitting on funding that doesn't have specific purpose and plan attached to it as part of the consortia plan, perhaps, it's just not able to spend that money. Maybe there's just not an effort underway to spend that money, that's really kind of wrong-headed. I mean, we are asking for additional funding, and yet we're not spending what we receive. That's problematic. And so looking at perhaps some guiding criteria to kind of help ensure that funding that is in kind of carryover either has a plan for it, whether that's infrastructure, what have you, or if not, needing to be more clear on a going forward basis, what is acceptable and kind of how much and for how long that can be carried over in order to ensure the greatest amount of funding going into classrooms and seats in the classroom. So more to come on that as we continue to refine that. In terms of the governor's proposed budget for fiscal year 2021, the governor did just release that budget proposal just on last week, I guess. It seems like it's been a lifetime since last Friday. But nonetheless, he released that budget proposal as part of an almost 2.5, 3-hour long press conference. This governor is very different from prior governors where they largely just kind of focus on a few highlights and then turn it over to their Department of Finance director. Governor Newsom is much more in the weeds in terms of the details of his budget proposal and really kind of led a very long explanation of all the different sections within his budget proposal, not only just in education, but other priority areas in health and human services, criminal justice, environmental resources, what have you. As part of the budget that pertains or potentially could pertain to some benefits or impacts for K-12 adult education, I just want to highlight a couple of items that are all, again, not approved. These are not final, but at least kind of the starting point for negotiations between the administration, Department of Finance governor, and the legislature. So really kind of starting off the gate, there is a funding provided in the budget at about an increase of $17 million that would go towards the Fresno Integrated K-16 Education Collaborative. Now, I'm told that this is building upon the Fresno Drive initiative there locally, which is largely considered kind of a pilot project of sorts, really focusing on kind of better and more innovative ways to offer education and provide for outcomes, kind of pathways into higher wage jobs and as well as post-secondary higher education. I'm told by Department of Finance that absolutely K-12 adult education would definitely be able to kind of work within this amount of funding. So for those of you in kind of that Fresno area, the consortia down there, I definitely should be looking at, if you're not already, in terms of working with kind of this effort and how you might tap into not only the resources, but just the work underway there to, again, kind of increase the visibility of our adult schools in that region in terms of their support and kind of role in the goals of this effort. I am told that there are some school districts, as well as Fresno State, some of the community colleges, that are already participating in kind of this Fresno Drive initiative. So that's certainly positive. So if you are not aware of this and are kind of in that Fresno area, Central Valley area, I would definitely encourage you to reach out to your school district to better understand kind of how they're engaged, if they are engaged, and how you might work more closely with them to ensure that you guys are a part of kind of those discussions, what have you. I am told that there will be no more specific trailer bill language, at least at this stage, to kind of further define the parameters and details of this proposal, that they expect, the finance expects that this will largely be driven at the local level in terms of kind of the details of this. I'm also told that they are not yet sure who would be the fiscal agent for this effort and to receive this funding. That is still a determination that they have not yet settled on. So for whatever that's worth, for those of you in kind of the Fresno area, if you're serving as a fiscal agent for your consortium, that might be something you might want to jump into the mix on in terms of, you know, making the case for why perhaps you might be well situated to be that entity. Additionally, this funding will not even go into specifically the kind of Department of Education or Chancellor's Office budget. Rather, it'll be put in the budget at the Office of Planning and Research, because again, it's focused on kind of a broader array of outcomes beyond just specifically education, but ultimately would be pushed down through OPR to the local entities to oversee the program and to a local fiscal agent. So more to come on that. Additionally, as part of the community college programs, they are set to receive a COLA at 2.29%. Adult education is included in that. You'll recall that the adult education program dollars are within the community colleges line item budget, and then distributed from there into the K-12 providers as well. So there is a COLA indeed already embedded in this, and we wanted to make sure we affirm that. Since over the last 2 years, we've actually seen the administration actually call out specifically adult education COLA, whereas this year it was kind of more embedded in kind of the broader COLA provided for all of the community college programs as well as those in the K-12 system. But I confirmed with Department of Finance this morning that COLA will be also for K-12 adult education as well. Additionally, in terms of apprenticeships opportunity expansion, so there is some funding in the budget, largely passed through to those kind of journey entry-level related programs and operators, but there may be some opportunity to kind of work with kind of those folks on the apprenticeship level at the local level. I'm told that funding largely goes to kind of some of the operators and the construction trades, building trades, firefighters, what have you, but still might be some opportunity there. As far as the Dreamer Resource Liaisons, as part of legislation passed in Assembly Bill 1645 last year and signed by the governor, the bill essentially provided for an increase of funding specifically for community colleges to provide funding for Dreamer Resource Liaisons to provide support services, including career pathways and economic mobility for immigrant students in community colleges. Unfortunately, at least at this stage, this funding is specifically being provided to comply with the provisions and the mandate in Assembly Bill 1645, specific to community colleges. That said, I think, you know, perhaps it's just kind of an informative point and perhaps kind of a marker for kind of perhaps some asks that we might pursue as part of the K-12 adult education system as well. So just not necessarily direct benefit for our K-12 providers, but certainly something that we might want to consider looking to mirror in some similar way for K-12 adult ed too. And then finally, the budget also provides for increased funding of $5 million for instructional materials for dual enrollment students. So this is really intended, although the funding is put into the community college budget, it is absolutely intended for dual enrollment, whether that be for K-12 students, traditional students, or our K-12 adult school students, to help reduce the costs associated with that dual enrollment and kind of ensuring that they have those pathways. No specific, details or parameters in terms of, who really where that funding would be directed, but certainly intended for that specific purpose, and in part related to legislation passed this last year under Senate Bill 554, Senator Ross. So more to come on that. I will also say, as part of that, in talking with finance this morning, we are still on board in terms of looking at kind of those ed code cleanup issues, as well as the carryover issues as well. So we'll be continuing to work with them on refining language as we move forward on that. So in terms of kind of doing a quick reality check, so all of that said, obviously, we completely appreciate and understand, we've continued to message that there is kind of a need for increased funding, no question. But I think we need to be clear as well that we need to continue and increase our level of education about adult ed. So, keep in mind, the community college, work is undertaken by each community college district who has, at least one Don Kepke, right? So they have at least one lobbyist that's working their issues, and so that's a lot of lobbyists on the ground for community college. And so there are sometimes where members, because they're juggling so many different issues, may confuse adult education for just specifically what community college provides, versus kind of better distinguishing that there are kind of additional kind of systems in place to help serve and support adult students. So definitely need to continue to increase that education level wherever possible, and not just presume that when we speak of adult education that these members, the administration, what have you, know what we're talking about and the difference between that. Additionally, needing to continue to increase and enhance our relationship building, that's going to be critical in terms of moving us forward. But we also need to be mindful that as far as the administration goes, Governor Newsom has a whole host of funding priorities and just policy priorities. Wildfire, certainly kind of the severe events of the last couple of years, and needing to address the issues around that. K-12 adult education being a part of education on the K-12 side, but really more focused on kind of the funding levels for serving kind of your more kind of traditional K-12 students. Also, priorities in the environmental space, early childhood education remains a priority. Homelessness is a really significant one, as well as healthcare and more. And then all of this to say, I know we've been talking about it, and I continue to message this, and probably some of you are rolling your eyes. This is the same, messaging we heard last year. But I think, this governor in particular is very concerned about the onset of another recession and making funding commitments that are ongoing that they wouldn't be able to necessarily sustain over kind of the long haul, and certainly through any recessionary period. So there is, while there is a potentially large surplus, estimates have it anywhere between $5 and $7 billion. The LAO, as well as the governor's office and Department of Finance, are really urged restraint and focus on kind of more one-time, kind of short-term funding focus areas, so as not to lock in commitments that they may not be able to keep. Now, we've continued to message that the return on investment is significant in terms of a tool in the toolbox to help stave off recessionary impacts for kind of, providing kind of increased education level attainment, as well as pathways to career, what have you. So we'll continue to refine that message to hopefully ensure that it is kind of well received and makes an impact. And then overarching all of this, so we've talked, recently, those of us kind of, within CCAE and CCAE that kind of chat really more regularly and talk about this all the time. But we need to really all be mindful of this kind of notion of climate change for adult ed. We're constantly evolving, but we really need to make sure that we are very cognizant of the importance in being tied to our K-12 school districts and the value that provides for our K-12 students. And so as part of that, really need to make sure that we are doing that reality check and are doing our footwork to ensure that our K-12 partners are invested in adult ed for the long haul. So in terms of kind of, what I always share with you guys is, look, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. I mean, we are definitely at the table. I will tell you, just in the last week, Assemblyman McCarty, who's the chair of the Budget Committee on Education on the Assembly side, came up to me and said, hey, Dawn, we definitely have some work ahead of us. We need to sit down and kind of roll up our sleeves and figure out, what's possible, and we need to continue this conversation, possibly look at this trailer bill language and putting that in on our side. So really very positive. I mean, that was unsolicited by me. That was just, standing in the hallway of the Capitol, and he came up to me based on conversations we've been having. So it's definitely, the importance of adult ed is definitely on his radar. Additionally, just this morning, as a matter of fact, I was in the Capitol, and Senator Ross, the Ledge Director, came up to me. The Ledge Director actually manages kind of the budget issues for the Senator, and Senator Ross, as you'll recall, is the budget chair for the Education Subcommittee on the Senate side, saying, hey, we really need to come back around and chat again and get up to speed again because, it's been a little while and the senator's asking what we're doing. So really very positive, and I think just, kind of only but two, there are many more examples of us being at the table, on the radar, what have you, so really good. So in terms of our strategy for this year, we are working off of an enhanced advocacy plan that we've put together, where we will be doing more advocacy webinars like this, but really kind of focused on kind of those advocacy tools, what have you, as well as endeavoring to provide greater and more timely updates to the field. So bear with us as we kind of get that ramped up, but that is definitely what we are endeavoring to do this year to keep you more up to speed in a more timely way, so that hopefully you'll turn around, use those relationships you've built with legislators in the district level to keep them apprised of developments, as well as being able to reach out to them with the most up-to-date information that you're hearing from us here in Sacramento. And so all of that, again, will entail focused advocacy, key contact building, such that if I have, our issue up in Budget Committee that day, and I need, to make sure that, we have the whole committee prepared to vote with us, I may say, hey, LAUSD, Jane Doe, you're my contact for, Senator, Bill, Jones. I really need you to call Senator Bill Jones. Jane Doe, you're his key contact. You have the best relationship at LAUSD with him. Can you please reach out to Senator Bill Jones and remind him that our issue's up in committee today, and to please vote yes on that. So that would be kind of a direct connection, not only based on my relationship at the state level with Senator Bill Jones, but Jane Doe, who's been working with Senator Bill Jones at the local level, has that rapport. He takes Jane Doe's calls. I want to make sure Jane Doe is backing up what I'm asking him at the state level for you guys as well. Additionally, we'll be doing some additional efforts to grow our coalition at the state level to support our funding asks. We've had very good feedback thus far from an array of different entities, both kind of in kind of the traditional education space, as well as kind of other allies who have more than education in terms of their focus areas. So that's really positive, and more to come on that. Also be looking at kind of opportunities to schedule adult school site visits and graduation attendance for these members at the local level. So as part of this, we will, and that focused advocacy, we have kind of a more shorter, more condensed list of legislators that we're going to be focused on kind of in terms of this direct focused advocacy. That's not to say that all of the members, 120 members, aren't important, because they absolutely are. The key, though, is in order to get over that hump of budget committees and getting things in the budget, you really need to kind of focus that advocacy on those members in particular, So the effort there for my purposes is really just rather than trying to touch all 120 members on my end, relying on all of you at the local level to work with your local electeds. And that gives me kind of more ability and time and bandwidth to really focus on your Senator Ross and Assemblyman McCarty, who are the chairs of the most important committees for our purposes. So, again, every legislator is important, no question about it. Really just kind of trying to ensure that we're really focusing on kind of those initial, key players and deciding entities at the outset. And then certainly working with our school boards and superintendents to really kind of focus them, make sure that they, know about the adult education program in, their district, the good work that you're doing, as well as kind of working on some opportunities to partner more so with our school boards and superintendents, as well as, perhaps engage them more so. And I know, in Contra Costa County, Victoria, who can chat about that shortly, she and Joanne Durkee, a school board member and former K-12 adult education administrator with CCAE and CCAE, they put on a great kind of presentation and kind of work group with some of their folks at the school board level in Contra Costa County and had really good results from that. So I just kind of also want to put a plug in. I know that they're going to be doing kind of some kind of workshopping, if you will, as part of the CCAE conference and possibly even the CCAE conference as well, to really, again, with the goal of engaging our school boards and superintendents to, help us advocate more so for adult ed, to really, provide additional benefit and expand our kind of voices that are out there supporting us. And then certainly, again, local grassroots. You guys know the drill. We're just going to be trying to provide you more timely and detailed, talking points, messaging materials, so that you guys have what you need at the local level. And then again, each year we always ask you to please, if you haven't already developed your adult school fact sheet, definitely at least do that. But also for those of you that have them, make sure you're updating those to be the most current they can be. So in terms of kind of a new piece of enhanced and focused advocacy, we are, as part of CCAE and CCAE, really excited to be launching kind of a more political level of engagement this year. We will be putting forward, and you'll be receiving information here very soon about an Adult Education Political Action Committee. It's K-12 Adult Education Matters is the committee. This committee is focused on political advocacy specifically and relationship building. Under this particular type of committee, we'll be able to do a number of things that we have not been able to do in the past and up till now. Will allow us to kind of help kind of better engage on a political level in terms of legislative races at the local level by developing questionnaires and interviewing candidates, doing candidate meet and greets, to better get to know those candidates that are running for the legislature earlier, and to hopefully build upon kind of a longer-term relationship with those folks from the outset. Also, as part of that could lead to endorsements of candidates that would be a non-monetary effort, but certainly provides value to candidates as they're running for legislative races. And then finally, on a voluntary basis, offering to CCAE and CCAE members the opportunity to contribute financially on a voluntary basis to our Political Action Committee to develop a spending budget with focused targets, focused legislators and focused races to provide additional support for those focused legislators or candidates with the goal of enhancing our relationships with them. To be clear, this funding is not intended or at all appropriate for any specific ask of any type of member. This is truly specifically to grow relationships and to elevate the profile of K-12 adult education for the purposes of that relationship building and to elevate our issues and priorities kind of broadly on these folks' radar. So again, not a quid pro quo. There would be no funding exchanged for any specific, request for budget or legislative action. Again, this is focused on as a focus tool for relationship building specifically. In terms of the materials, I'm going to just run through this really quick so we have a time for some questions at the end. We'll be doing a whole host of different sets of materials between differentiated stakeholder talking points for coalition members as well as folks in the field. Also working on school board engagement talking points and a plan for that. Sample letters, resolutions, we'll have those Adult Education Week sample resolutions out for you here shortly. Informational packets, FAQs, as well as developing our key contacts and providing them with adult school fact sheets, ensuring they have access to those as well. So at this point, that wraps up what I wanted to share with you at this point. And Victoria and Steve and Adriana, I'll turn it over to you guys to field some questions, if that's okay.
Okay, so I do know that Steve and Victoria had fielded a couple of questions that came in individually. And thank you, everybody, for bearing with us. And we had a little bit of technical difficulty and then some drilling going on. It's, we are live, so this is what happens. We're not in studios. But anyway, Steve and Victoria, maybe you want to share the questions that came in as well as what you responded in the chat, because I don't think that was to everybody.
Yes, and Steve, maybe you can do that because Steve, you were integral in the work that CCAE and CCAE we've done on looking at the carryover. So could you speak to that, please?
Yeah, so there was a question, really when you hear about carryover, probably a lot of us out there have some carryover. So we've talked about, started talking about, well, what's appropriate? And there's reasons why we would have carryover. But then you get to the point where, well, at a certain point, it would seem there's a certain point where there's too much carryover. We don't know what that is. So that's when we started looking at data to see, well, what is out there? What do people carry over? And so what I did, I guess with my staff, I won't, in case there's any errors in this, I will take the blame. But we went back, and I went back with my staff, and we looked at I'm blanking, NOVA's financial reporting, where everyone submits what they've spent, and in there it shows what was allocated, and then based on self-reporting, it comes up with the figure what's being carried over. And so basically, if you got to go through each individual person or each individual consortia, each individual member, you look at what were allocated, look at what they spent, and you get this number. And it actually shows you that number, the bottom line number, on the website and in NOVA. So all that, if you look at the K-12 side, K-12 is carrying over about 17% of the little over $400 million that comes into K-12. For the community colleges, it's at 71% is what we're calculating. And so we've obviously talked to a lot of people in the K-12. Where is this, why do we have such a carryover? A couple factors that have come into play is the delay in funding that we've experienced on the K-12 side. If you are direct funded, you all know that we just actually recently got our first payment for this year, for the 19-20 school year. And so when that's happened the last 3 years, what typically happens in many cases, districts will stop spending adult ed money. We'll put freezes on professional development, freezes on capital expenditures, non-capital expenditures, supplies and such. So by the time the money was released in the past year, and as an example this year too, you have very little time to meet those spending deadlines, especially if you have a lot of money that's been dedicated towards your instructional supplies, your 4,000s and 5,000s. So for us, for example, we have an April 1st deadline. We just got our funding. So we have 3 months, January, February, March to spend down all of our 4,000s. And there's a few $100,000 that were dedicated in that. But fortunately, our district did let us spend in advance, so we're okay. Others not as much, and they're facing a spending Price is Right type of just buy whatever you can, get whatever you can, just to spend down that dollars in a very responsible way. I have to add that I'm not assuming anyone's just going to just buy a bunch of paper or things they don't need. But that's what we know on the K-12 side. We've asked a lot of people. On the college side, we're still trying to get an understanding of why it's so high. I know Dawn has worked and spoken with ACE and with Madeline and Valentina, and we've shared with them our data. So they're going to go back and look on their side, the college side, and come up with some reasonings so as to why that's happening. So that's the long of it.
And then there's
you.
a follow-up question on that about carryover and reallocating the ongoing funds to the rest of us who spend all their money. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, and I just answered it to Jeff Oakes. Thank you for the question, Jeff. And it is something we're looking at. Clearly, these are issues that bubble up from the field, and then your state organizations are taking a good look at them. We have identified that this is a concern. And Jeff's question is about, couldn't that money then be reallocated so those who need it and can spend it will be able to do that? So yes, that's a valid question. And yes, we are definitely looking at that. I would like to, though, share just from a personal perspective as a co-chair of our Contra Costa County Adult Education Consortium, that we early on also identified this, and we have folded this discussion into our own budget development process and have included it already in language in our budget member agreement, which sets forth the collaboration on budget development. We still have a lot of work to do on budget development in terms of what specific should we be looking at, enrollment, attendance, program priority areas, numbers of students served, et cetera, as elements for budget development. But on this issue, we have agreed among our members that if we have carryover beyond 40%, if we have not spent down 40% of our funding by a certain period during the year, we cannot ask for additional funding. And there is a process by which our members can advocate still for additional funding, but it's just that it would give us a deeper dive into the request and to have that conversation. So we're trying to be good stewards and fiscally responsible and conservative, because clearly the funding is not unlimited. And also many of us have been within our own consortium work flat funded over the last few years, and our funds have not been increased. So that's just one way that we can also take stewardship locally to figure out how that works. And when we move the needle on the dial around that, it would be done in the consortium process. So I hope that helps to look at it also from the inside of a consortium. Anything you want to add to that, Steve?
Oh, there's a lot, but I agree. And I think Victoria is really one of the consortia that's really dived into this issue more than others that I've heard about that are struggling with this issue, where they know a member's holding on to a lot of cash. And so it is a very tricky one, and I applaud her, because I've brought it up in my local consortia, and it is a difficult conversation. And these are members that we're supposed to get along with and work collaboratively with, and especially in the case of the colleges, we want our students to have access to college courses and have a streamlined process of doing so. But much like, if you can imagine, when you're not in agreement with your significant other and you're talking money, and you know how that can be very touchy. You know, it's a natural thing that these conversations can lead to some ill will, and we don't want that. And so as we approach this topic, we're trying to work collaboratively with ACE. We know that there's this chunk of money out there in the colleges that at first glance, my first response is, well, we should get that money. But at the same time, you know, that's not going to be as easy as just saying we should get the money and then it's just going to happen. We want to understand the situation better and make sure we approach it in a way that the colleges are appreciative of the situation that we're in, where K-12 is really facing, many of us are spending all our money. That 17% is spread out over what, 100 and I forget how many school districts we have getting that money, but there's a lot of us that are spending every dollar and always concerned that we might not have enough to cover all our costs. Again, we're working on that. I think there's opportunities there, but at the same time, we're trying not to upset the relationships that we've all worked so hard to build within our consortia.
Yes, and I would just like to say that's a valid point, because much of our work is about relationship building, and we have consortia statewide that have some strong relationships already built, and others are newer to the work. And we all know this is multi-year system building, so it's that, you know, old adage, Rome wasn't built in a day. I do think that, and there are nuances to this issue of the carryover. So the point really is that we need to be really thoughtful about it and ensure that the collaborative process can be maintained. But it's an understanding, and I think our colleges are really understanding more as they work with us how integral to our continued programming and services this funding is, because we really have limited other sources of funding, maybe some CalWORKs, some Perkins, we might have some First Five funding, etc., but we don't have other resources. So now that we're flat funded for a few years, particularly in this process, these are all beginning to surface, these issues. So there's no easy answer, but we just need to continue to do the work within our consortia and see how we can, you know, figure it out. So thank you for sharing that, Steve.
I think there was a follow-up question, and I don't know if this is, it's directed to Steve from Ed Schmossel, but I don't know, he was asking if we know the total amount of carryover, right?
Yeah, I see that's the question from Ed is the college carrying 71% of all the carryover? No, that's 71% represents of the allocation they receive, which I think is around 40 million. They would have a, what that would be 40 times 71, so 2.8 million or 28 million, I'm sorry,
yeah,
carried over.
Right.
Actually, if you look at it as if adult ed K-12 side has 17% of the 440 million, that comes out to be somewhere like 70 million, I'm sorry. So actually K-12 has the larger portion of the overall pot. Mm-hmm. But the way we look at it is we're looking at it on an individual school basis. How much are you carrying over per your school, not the overall state funding.
Right. And I think we've addressed all the questions, unless any of you have additional comments before we close out the webinar.
I want to put in a plug for Ledge Day.
I was going to do that.
We usually have Ledge Day in March, but because our annual CCAE conference is in Sacramento this year, you know, we rotate between Northern and Southern California, we'd like to invite you all. We would like to have you bring your students to join us, and community members, partners, for Ledge Day, April 23rd, Thursday, which is right before the CCAE conference. And we will have a single Ledge prep webinar with Dawn on February 14th, Sweethearts Day, Valentine's Day. I believe we have it 11:30 to 1. The information will be on the CCAE website, and we encourage you to join us there. It will be an archived webinar as well. But we look forward to seeing you there and responding to questions. Last plug, please do send us your local section, CCAE section Ledge Chair. And if you don't know who that is, you can find that on our CCAE website under our legislative information. Your agency fact sheets, which we need for Ledge Day, but also Dawn needs these, this profile, single page profile sheet that she can rely on for basic information about your school, your students, your successes when she meets with our legislators in Sacramento. So thank you very much for those who've already sent them in for the new year, new school year coming up, and look forward to receiving more from others.
And thank you, Victoria. You did a much more comprehensive job than I would have done. I was going to also remind everybody about CCAE CCAE Ledge Day on Thursday, April 23rd, in conjunction with the state conference. But thank you for going into those further details. And there was a question on if we can use CAPE funds to visit Sacramento for Ledge Day. I'm going to leave that to one of our panelists to answer.
Well, since the only funding we have really mostly is CAPE dollars, I think that's a really interesting question. I'm not sure I thought about it that way. Okay. But I think we always rely on what our districts also allow, and many of us currently are in this budget phase where we are really looking very closely at our budgets along with our district colleagues. Typically, funds have been outside funds that we've used. People also use personal funds. So I think I would refer this really back to you, the individuals asking this, and have a conversation with your administrator so you can figure out how you might be able to support students attending. I think that's
right. And I know that some schools do fundraising, and
yes,
you know, however
yes,
they can. I know that fundraising is kind of sometimes a touchy question with regard to schools and school districts, but there's some kind of fundraising or snacks or Valentine's Day treats or Sweetheart's Day treats or something.
right.
And all of the profits go to being able to support students to go to Ledge Day or some activity. Anyway,
Yes, I would say one thing, if I may, about that. If you are going to report out to your legislators, which you are, and showcase your good works at your school, and really be very transparent about this with your administrators and also your district, those in the district who have to approve these kinds of things, it might be doable.
Okay, so we're getting a couple of different kinds of responses in from a variety of people who have done this. Suggestion from Chris Nelson, making it an EL Civics activity.
There you go.
During
yes.
Ledge Day with conference attendance.
Yes.
And we don't lobby, which is an important point. We visit our legislators, so it is an EL Civics type of activity. So there are some interesting panelist comments as well.
All good ideas.
Yeah, all great ideas.
And but again, I think you want to kind of figure it out as your team and have transparency around it. But it is definitely a reporting out also, so I would advocate for that.
Right. So before I close out, I do want to thank everyone. Thank you for your questions, and remind everyone that today's webinar has been recorded, and the link to the recording will be emailed to members in about a week. I want to thank our panelists, Dawn, for all of her hard work on putting all of this information together for us, and obviously to Victoria and to Steve and to David as well for doing the logistics here. And I did notice that we have a registration link in our chat area for registering for Ledge Day, and I'm not sure, I don't believe that the webinar is registering. We want to know how many people are coming to Ledge Day, so we will have that up very soon. Registration will be up very soon for that. There's no charge for Ledge Day, but we want to have an idea of how many people will be coming so that we can be prepared and make sure that everything's comfortable for everyone. So thank you to all participants and panelists, and we look forward to working with you all in the upcoming months. Enjoy the 3-day weekend for Martin Luther King Day, and thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you. Take care.